Good afternoon and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. As I'm sure most of you folks have heard, SpaceX has been contracted for nearly $1 billion to destroy the International Space Station. This is, without a doubt, the stupidest contract that NASA has ever signed with anybody, and they need to be stopped. And I'm going to explain why this is the case and what we can do as an alternative to destroying the ISS right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to the Angry Astronaut. I'm going to be talking extensively about the possible destruction of the ISS and why this is such an idiotic idea, and I'm going to be quoting extensively from an article entitled Save Freedom. We Must Stop the Destruction of the International Space Station by Rick Tumlinson. Rick Tumlinson was recently listed as one of the top 100 most influential people in the space industry, and this is what Space News magazine said about him. Quote, part agitator, part operator, Tumlinson has spent the past 2 decades advocating human exploration and settlement of the solar system and has been a strong advocate of creating commercial opportunities at the Russian Mir space station and at the International Space Station. He long advocated to save the Mir space station when there was still a chance of doing that. That, of course, ended in failure, and now, of course, he is trying to save the ISS. But why is he trying to do this? I mean, if we abandon the ISS where it is going to be a colossal hazard. Already, the ISS has had to dodge many pieces of space debris that could have potentially seriously damaged it or destroyed it, and if this gigantic station gets smashed to bits in orbit while we are no longer maintaining any sort of vigil over it, it could create a colossal cloud of space debris that would have the potential of destroying virtually everything in low Earth orbit through a chain reaction known as the Kessler syndrome. And we can't keep the station in operation either because it is becoming increasingly unreliable, and the astronauts on board are having to devote the lion's share of their time to working on, maintaining, and repairing the station instead of doing the scientific work they're supposed to be doing. The ISS seems to have served its purpose, so why not just deorbit it and crash it into a safe area on the planet rather than leaving it in orbit where it might be able to do a hell of a lot of damage. Once again, let's get started with this article, which was released, by the way, on July 2nd. It's been a while, and yet makes some really good points. Quote, last week was incredibly depressing. For anyone paying attention, it finally became apparent that, unless a dramatic change occurs after decades of service, coming events may well push an American icon into the trash heap of history. I am, of course, speaking of NASA's decision to hire SpaceX to dump the International Space Station on the Earth. Truth be told, this decision has put me in a quandary. The greatest exploration entity in history is hiring the best space company in history to do the stupidest thing in history. As one of the few people on the planet with some small standing in the discussion, I've been against the idea of destroying the ISS since it was first announced. First, as one of the leaders of the Space Frontier Foundation, I helped lead an almost successful campaign in Congress to have the ISS canceled in the early 1990s. Why? Because we believe the government shouldn't build buildings and drive trucks like the space shuttle. Also, by then, it was clear that President Reagan's announced vision of the station as a spaceport to the solar system to be completed in the mid-90s for under $10 billion was not going to happen. Judged by the expectations set by the president, the ISS was never finished, as construction on it stopped somewhere around the year 2010 after $100 billion had been spent by the U.S. and its partners. We lost the fight by one vote, or as my NASA friends say, they saved it by one vote. And by the way, I'm very glad personally that they did save it, simply because the project would have been much more difficult if we had left it to the commercial industry alone, and it would have been impossible if the Russians had tried to build a new space station by themselves. This, by the way, was something that was supposed to be Space Station Freedom at one time, and it was only through our collaboration with the Russians that this ever came into existence. This, of course, being the ISS. And incidentally, you may be noticing this incredible animation here. It was created by the incomparable Hayzegrayart. I have his YouTube channel linked in the description. Please support everything that this person does. He creates some of the most awesome spaceflight animation that's ever been made. Now we're going to cut away from that. If you want to see the entire clip, you're going to have to actually go to his YouTube channel to check it out. So let's go ahead and move on with the article. Quote, "Next, in 1995, having accepted this loss and as part of an effort to leverage the taxpayers' investment in the station, I called in my Alpha Town testimony in front of Congress for all transportation to and from the station to be commercially provided. NASA's ISS supply and crew needs could be leveraged to help spur a competitive commercial space travel industry. At the same hearing, I called for private firms to build and operate all expansions and further facilities. It's unfortunate that it took over 15 years for NASA to finally do that through the Commercial Crew Project. Finally, staying true to the frontier philosophy of not throwing anything away in space, the Foundation began a quest to save the Russian Mir space station. Eventually, I led a team to Moscow, underwritten by the visionary Walt Anderson, which resulted in the founding of Mir Corp and leasing Mir as the world's first commercial space station. After flying our first crew to survey the facility and under extreme pressure from NASA and the US government, Russian President Putin ordered it to be deorbited and dumped into the Pacific. It was a crushing blow, although the project led to the signing of Dennis Tito as the first private astronaut, whom we later transferred to fly on the ISS. I was in tears when it happened, a sad sign that there would be much more work needed to transform the psychology of space leaders from the existing use it and throw it away mentality that has been the hallmark of recent human industrial activity. Since then, like most of us who follow such things, I have been impressed by the incredible work the agency and its partners have done aboard the orbiting lab. Amazing breakthroughs have flowed non-stop from the work of the astronaut and cosmonaut crews who have flown aboard her, and so has inspiration for millions of school children listening to thousands of lessons from space, lighting young imaginations around the world. The orbiting lab has become a beacon and evening star for the power of science. And yes, even as the world below has churned and boiled at the instigation of politicians, the spirit of the international right stuff has kept the candle of hope alive that humanity can work together to open the frontier of space to all. Unfortunately, that is about to come to an end, not only with the end of the ISS, but the end of the US-Russian partnership that defined the success of this amazing space station. That's my personal opinion, by the way. We'll go on with the article. So in an amazing, almost iconic twist of fate a few years ago, I found myself taking the stand that the US government cannot, must not, and if I can do anything about it, shall not dump one of the most important buildings in human history on the planet that is home to those who built it. The International Space Station must be preserved for future generations. It is without a doubt, and without question, one of humanity's greatest achievements, on par with, and in many ways exceeding the value to our global society of the pyramids, the Parthenon, Angkor Wat, or any other World Heritage Site. Like them, it must be saved from the short-sighted silliness of bureaucratic bullies and their version of a space bulldozer. Some will ask, why is this so important? We need to get on with the tasks of constructing the new space stations on the orbital street, returning to the moon, and even planning missions to Mars. Who cares about an old and useless building whose time has come and gone? The future calls. Yes, it does. And how we treat the heritage we create along the way to that future will, in many ways, help determine if that future is an extension of how we have treated the world from which we come, or if we have learned anything and aspire to do better. If NASA dumps ISS on the Earth, it will be the worst public relations disaster in history. At the very moment, new generations of eco-conscious young people are taking the reins of control as the agency that has stood for a hopeful vision of the future will be trashing the planet. Ridiculous. Worse, one of the world's most exciting companies will be spattered by the debris along the way. It is an awful decision, a terrible plan, and a signal that America isn't serious about staying in space. For if it were, it would protect such a treasured symbol of what went into making it happen. And I totally agree. SpaceX has been taking so much negative press lately that if they destroy the space station or are party to all of that, it's going to make their reputation even worse. And NASA's been taking some serious hits as well, and that's a great way of turning many people who would otherwise support NASA against them. We'll go on with the article. Before I offer solutions, let's be clear about how we got here. Given the old school industrial mindset that I mentioned earlier, as ordered by Congress and the White House, NASA has done no serious work on how to save the facility. Their bosses in Washington began with and have stayed true to their primitive mindset. The groupthink at work here has been reinforced by artificially imposed budget constraints created by bad decisions by Congress and other parts of the program that are eating America's tax dollars at an alarming rate. When asked, agency officials churn the waters with red herrings, the difficulties of maneuvering such a large facility upwards into a storage orbit, maintenance costs, even the altitude of such an orbit, using numbers based on higher than needed locations, and more. In no particular order, here are the basics of my proposal. And I have a couple of things that I'll be adding to this, but we'll go ahead and get started with what this gentleman has to say. Number one, the ISS be stripped of whatever of the billions of dollars of still useful hardware and tech that it has aboard. This can be auctioned to one of the several new commercial space station facilities, or even, if appropriate, transferred to NASA's planned lunar orbiting gateway facility. The U.S. government might even choose to use parts of this exercise as a way to put in place and create precedents for much needed salvage laws that can then be applied to help cleaning up low Earth orbit by creating paths that currently do not exist for space operators to transfer ownership of in-space assets to others. Number two, the tug SpaceX is being contracted to build and operate be designed as an orbital tug rather than a single-use system. Totally agree with this, by the way. Such a spacecraft would be so useful to our future ambitions in orbit. But let's go ahead and see what he has to say. Quote, such an important tool will prove to be invaluable over time, moving large payloads around in orbit once they are delivered by large space trucks like Starship and Blue Origin's New Glenn. Further, given plans to build massive orbital tanker farms and the sure-to-be growing number of private space stations now on the drawing boards, such an orbital tug will be an important safeguard when they face failures of their onboard systems. Number three, Russia be provided the option to provide support to this effort, offering a chance for well-needed cooperation between our nations. If they choose to decouple their part of the station, what they do with it will be their decision. This will leave the original U.S. modules, once known as Freedom, for us to manage. Number four, the facility be fitted with a basic kit of onboard thrusters, or its existing thruster system will be adapted to provide minimum maximum control authority. This will prove to be a useful exercise for all involved, providing lessons useful for future large structures while drawing from existing knowledge developed by operators of large communication satellites. And number 5, the station be moved to a medium-high orbit, sealed, and declared a universal heritage site. This new designation can also be applied to the Apollo, Russian Lunokhod, Chinese Chang'e, and Indian moon landing sites, as well as significant historical sites on Mars. If the world fails to do so, or if such a designation takes too long to implement, the U.S. can designate Freedom as a federal national heritage site. There are many people in our space community who are much smarter than me who can solve these challenges. They have not been asked to do so. Among such smart people are those building the new commercial LEO destinations, or CLDs, or private space facilities. To date, they have been singing the NASA song that the ISS must die. This is for 2 prime reasons. A fear that anything looking like an extension of the facility's life means it stays as a competitor to their plans, and the fact that they are caught in the NASA sphere of influence and that no one speaks against the plan, capitalized. I get it. I believe this effort benefits all involved. Like any venerable historical building in any community anywhere, something deeply saddening will occur when the creator of their legacy is destroyed. ISS pioneered everything they're trying to do. Supporting this effort will cost them nothing, and it will say to a new generation that what they are building is part of something long-term and permanent. This truth goes especially for NASA. If we are indeed and at last opening the frontier to Americans and humanity, are we not doing so permanently? Do we not intend that the decades of our investments in space will result in expanding human communities beyond the Earth? Do we not then owe these future pioneers and citizens of the solar system the right to their legacy? I can imagine a time in 100 years when the children and grandchildren of today's space heroes are living and working in an expanding bubble of life growing outward from the mother world of Earth. I can see a time when the citizens of the future decide that the venerable old station that gave them their first real foothold will be reawakened. I see the moment, probably covered not just globally, but on media stretching from Earth to the Moon, Mars, and the free space between, when the lights are turned back on and freedom once again shines. It is time for those of today who believe that what we are doing in space is not just short-term set of camping trips and expeditions, but a harbinger of the next phase of humanity's existence to start acting like it. Friends of freedom, from her astronauts to those who have built and kept her flying, were inspired by work done aboard her, or simply folks who believe in the importance of preserving historical monuments, and those who do not believe that we should trash the Earth from space need to organize and educate Congress and the White House as to why the current plan is bad, what the alternatives might be, and how important this cherished piece of our history is and will be. And I agree with virtually everything that this man has to say, but I have something to add to it. If we do indeed push the ISS up to the orbit that he is suggesting, it will become a problem eventually, but not for many decades. Future generations will have to deal with it, but at that point, hopefully, we will have a much bigger presence in space than we do now, and that will give us the opportunity to push the ISS even higher into a geosynchronous orbit, where it will never be in danger of falling into the atmosphere again, and the few other satellites and micrometeoroids that fly around in geosynchronous orbit, well, they are very few and far between, and this station will almost certainly survive, not just for centuries, but for millennia, perhaps even for eons. And that, in my opinion, is going to be very important, because for all we know, the Earth could end tomorrow, our civilization could be wiped off the face of this planet by a nuclear war and the horrendous nuclear winter and chaos that would follow, or perhaps a comet or an asteroid that we just haven't noticed yet. Anything could eliminate our civilization forever. And then what will remain? Our environment, the water, winds, and other things that our ecology creates will wipe every presence of our civilization from the surface of this planet, and the only thing that will remain will be what we have placed in space, where there is no wind, there is no erosion, there is no rain. And then, if a future civilization happens to come across this planet and wonders if anybody was ever here, if they find the ISS, I think that will be proof enough that an intelligent species once occupied this planet and they were capable of incredible things. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also please check the description for various ways to support this content. And once again, don't forget to check out Hayzegrayart's channel, and as always, stay angry about space.